Zulfi Bhutto of Pakistan, His Life and Times by Stanley Wolpert. Chapter 5 Apprenticeship to Power, 1958 to 1963. After celebrating his 30th birthday with a month of festive hunting, Zulfi flew to Geneva early in March 1958 to chair the Pakistan delegation to the United Nations Conference on the Law of the Sea. His boon shooting companion, President Mirza, had personally chosen him for that prestigious assignment. Zulfi was grateful, writing shortly after he reached Switzerland to reassure Mirza of his imperishable and devoted loyalty to you. I feel that your services to Pakistan are indispensable, Zulfi found. When the history of our country is written by objective historians, your name will be placed even before that of Mr. Jinnah. Sir, I say this because I mean it, and not because you are the president of my country, he added, trying to convince himself that it wasn't gross sycophancy. I do not think I could be found guilty of the charge of flattery. Mirza was still promising to hold elections and Noon was still hanging on as Prime Minister, but none of Pakistan's basic problems had been solved. Frustration and popular discontent were rampant, east and west, and the economy was rapidly deteriorating. General Ayub Khan blamed Mirza for much of the political chaos that followed adoption of the Constitution of 1956. Shrewd as he was, he could see how the constitution could be used to promote political intrigues and bargaining. Yesterday's traitors were tomorrow's chief ministers. Everyone connected with the political life of the country is utterly exposed and discredited. Ayub soon confirmed Noon's theory that Mirza had never intended to hold the general elections, but was looking for a suitable opportunity to abrogate the constitution. Indeed, he was setting the stage for it. As army commander-in-chief, Ayub would be first to know. We are conscious of the failures of the past, Zulfi assured the conference on the law of the sea, but are also poignantly aware of the dictates of this thermonuclear age that give us the ultimatum to either embrace peace with the arms of law or perish forever in the graveyard of a world Carthage. Zulfi had not forgotten his lessons in rhetoric at the Oxford Union. Times have undoubtedly changed. Institutions and values of yore have become a fate. Invincible states that controlled the destinies of teeming multitudes are now weak and vulnerable. Those held in bondage are now free, and with that freedom have changed the path of history. Pakistan is deeply concerned with all the laws of the sea. Both wings of Pakistan have fairly large coastlines. Its fisheries are of considerable economic importance. Most important of all, it is the sea that connects East and West Pakistan, and through this mighty force of nature, we maintain the geographical indivisibility of our state. Then, the high seas are free to all. Every nation, large and small, old and new, has the right to take fullest advantage of the resources provided by this freedom. Nations that have faith and confidence in their intrinsic strength must have the vision to think of their interests in terms of centuries. After all, what are 50 years and even 100 in the histories of countries that hold the legacy of civilizations dating back to Mohenjo-daro and Pompeii? If the United States of America could subscribe to the doctrine of the freedom of the high seas at a time when she was not able to take full advantage of that freedom, why cannot the other young and virile nations do the same? Zulfi spoke again in Geneva before flying home, winning admiration and kudos from many delegates. His ringing reaffirmation of freedom of the seas elicited praise from Secretary of State John Foster Dulles, and though most of his audience in Geneva may never have heard of Mohenjo-daro before, they now knew at least that Pakistan's antiquity rivaled that of Pompeii. World diplomacy was the setting for Zulfi. He enjoyed every moment in the international limelight. All of his higher education had trained Indeed, primed him for this fascinating arena of power and intrigue. It could hardly have been put to better use. Unlike the practice of law, flying halfway round the world to address a room full of equally learned leaders from every corner of the globe was pure adrenaline to Zulfi's spirit. He revelled in his own wit and charm, his clever turn of phrase, declamatory skill, the ring of rhetoric that came so naturally to him. Perhaps most of all, he was exhilarated by the social conviviality, grand luncheons, and sumptuous banquets in gracious rooms overlooking Lake Leman and Lake Success. He was filled with the sense of virile power that freedom brings to young men as well as young nations. In 1958, Zulfi and Nusrat's youngest son, Shah Nawaz, destined to die of an overdose in southern France little more than a quarter century later, was born. I was reading a book by Gogol, Begum Nusrat recalled, so I called him Gogol because my mother-in-law said, you can't call him Shah Nawaz because when you scold him, it's being disrespectful to his grandfather. So it became Gogol. Then the little ones called him Gogi. Benazir had just finished Lady Jennings' nursery school and was enrolled in Karachi's Convent of Jesus and Mary private school. Mir Murtaza, 4, was still at home, as was Sanam, named for the goddess of love but called Sunny by the family because of her cheerful disposition. The elegant new Bhutto home at 70 Clifton in Karachi was in those days always bustling with life and activity, filled with beautiful children who kept their lovely young mother busy and happy. He used to call me Nusratam, my Nusrat, and I called him Zulfi. We used to do crossword puzzles sometimes. Mostly, he won. He used to love playing with the children, but once they grew up, 7, 8 or 9, he thought the boys should be brought up strictly. They should stand on their own feet. I asked only one thing of you, that you do well in your studies. My father told us time and again, Benazir recalled in her autobiography. As we grew older, he hired tutors to instruct us in maths and English in the afternoons after school, and he kept track of our school reports by phone from wherever he was in the world. Luckily, I was a good student, for he had great plans for me to be the first woman in the Bhutto family to study abroad. Pinky will leave as a scruffy little kid and come back a beautiful young lady in a sari. Shah Nawaz will pack so many clothes his suitcase won't close, Papa Zulfi predicted. He knew how to treat his children. Begum Nusrat said, they could argue with their father and they used to disagree on certain subjects. Benazir's character is a lot like her father's. In her thought, her thinking, her character, she is a lot like her father. The exact shape of her hand. My husband had very delicate, nice, pretty hands. He had a lot of hair when we first married. Very wavy. Pakistan was quite dull to Zulfi after Geneva and compared to New York. He kept busy, however, between his home and family in Larkana and work he did there as president of the Badgar Association and his office and family in Karachi, where he served on the West Pakistan Social Welfare Council as well as the Pakistan General Cotton Committee. Yet, none of those provincial boards truly challenged the restless talents of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. They were small-town jobs with slow-minded men arguing over petty problems. He had supped with kings and danced with queens, knew the high life of London and the bright and seamy sides of the United States. So, that summer, when President Mirza invited Zulfi Bhutto to join the next cabinet as Minister of Commerce, he accepted with alacrity. Dr. Khan Sahib had been shot dead that May, and the Deputy Speaker of East Pakistan's Assembly was fatally stabbed in September after having been declared insane and dragged from the House. Every party had its own paramilitary force, and though Prime Minister Noon banned all private military forces in late September, it was too late for the ban to prove effective. From a soldier's position, it was quite clear to me that the general elections were going to be stand-up fights, Ayub Khan declared. Whether the army liked it or not, it would get embroiled because, in the final analysis, it would become a question of maintaining some semblance of law and order. Law and order is every army's excuse for a coup. On 7th October 1958, President Mirza wrote to his Prime Minister, "After very careful searching of my heart, I have come to the conclusion that the country cannot be sound unless I take full responsibility." The 1956 Constitution was thus unceremoniously added to Pakistan's growing constitutional scrap heap. By the time you get this letter, martial law will come into operation and General Ayub, whom I have appointed as the Chief Martial Law Administrator, will be in position. The hour had struck. Ayub reminisced. He had arrived in Karachi on 5th October 1958 and went directly to see President Mirza, who was brooding bitter and desperate. Ayub thought, "Have you made up your mind, sir?" the Commander-in-Chief asked. The President replied, "Yes." 2 days later, on 7th October at 8 p.m., the curtain rang down on Pakistan's civil government. Mirza proclaimed martial law, or what Ayub, as Chief Martial Law Administrator, liked rather perversely to call the revolution. Very soon, however, the co-conspirators, or rather founding fathers of that dramatic change in the course of Pakistan's ship of state, had a falling out. Ayub did not trust Mirza, blaming first of all his lovely and talented Persian wife, Begum Nahid, for plotting to finish off his military partner in revolution, threatening supposedly to do to Ayub Khan what Ayub did instead to Mirza. Ayub commanded the army. After all, Mirza was only a lame duck president with no government, not even a nominal cabinet, to turn to any longer for moral support. Each day, that fateful October, Ayub took more responsibility and initiatives into his own large hands, till Mirza tried, in a last desperate effort to retain control, to appoint Ayub Prime Minister over a 12-man cabinet, whose youngest member was Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. On 27th October 1958, President Mirza swore in the new cabinet with Generals Azam Khan, Burki and Sheikh, directly under Ayub. Manzoor Qadir was the foreign minister, Muhammad Shoaib in charge of finance, and Zulfi Bhutto given commerce. Ayub considered the job of Prime Minister a demotion because he would be serving under Mirza. That very evening, Ayub struck, sending his 3 toughest subordinates, General Azam Khan, Burki and Sheikh, to Mirza's house with an offer to step down immediately but keep your pension and your life. The president wisely accepted, obviously understanding the alternative. The army's legal experts came up with the opinion. Ayub wrote, in trying to shift the blame for his treachery, that the office of the president was redundant. I said, "Now, don't you chaps start creating more problems for me. Why do you bother me?" I had hoped that Iskandar Mirza would settle down to the new situation. We had been good friends. I told myself that unless he did anything overtly wrong, it would be disloyal on my part to act against him. But the clamor became louder from the headquarters and from the army officers. They all said, "Whatever you may be doing, this man is doing everything to nullify it all." They feared that the people would have no faith in our policies. I said finally, "If you feel like that, I shall go and tell him so." They said, "No, you should not go. We will tell him on your behalf." It was Ayub's second revolution in 3 weeks. Ayub assumed the title of president the next day, returning the Mirza cabinet, including its youngest member, Minister of Commerce Zulfi Bhutto, soon to be entrusted with half a dozen other cabinet portfolios as well by Ayub, including that of foreign minister. Zulfi Bhutto's name, however, is not even mentioned in Ayub's autobiography, published in 1967, a year after he fired Zulfi from the cabinet. Small wonder Zulfi was overheard to say of Ayub's ghost-written work, "The book is full of lies. Black lies, white lies, all sorts of lies." Mirza, flown to London with his Begum, lived quietly there till his death on 13th November 1969, 70 years to the day from the day of his birth. His body was flown to Tehran and buried there with state honors by the order of the Shahenshah. Zulfi Bhutto stood by President Mirza throughout his long exile. Mirza's son, Humayun, wrote in the preface of his father's autobiography sent to Prime Minister Bhutto during his last year in office. Zulfi, however, once characterized Mirza to his oldest friend, Pilo Moody, as a gentleman who knew nothing about politics. He thought that by small gestures, pranks and tricks, he could run the ship of state. President Ayub proved much more durable than his partner in the revolution. Ayub was a Spintaran Pathan and had always remained in the army. Like many soldiers, he liked to pretend that he was a simple man. For all that simplicity, however, he would hold supreme power over Pakistan longer than any other person had before his double coup. Only one other simple Muslim, General Ziaul Haq, 1925 to 1988, would enjoy a longer tenure at the top of the Islamabad Pindi pyramid of power. Zulfi started his career on very cordial terms with Ayub, who needed a smart Sindhi advisor and preferred Zulfi Bhutto to M.A. Kohro. The latter had been brought in as defense minister by Suharwardi to keep Commander-in-Chief Ayub Khan in his place several years earlier. One of Ayub's first orders, in fact, was to arrest Kohro for black marketeering, not an uncommon sin in Karachi. Almost as important as Zulfi's youth and brains in helping to explain his rapid rise in Ayub's cabinet was his lack of prior political involvement. He had, as yet, relatively few enemies other than his inherited feudal rivals. His weaknesses were virtually unknown, but because of his father, everyone knew his name. Zulfi's 8-year political apprenticeship under Ayub Khan gave him his first real taste of power and experience in handling public affairs. He had entered the military government by appointment, of course, so did not have to worry about election campaigns or pleasing constituents. Still, Zulfi knew more about politics than most of his cabinet elders, with the exception of Ayub. And Ayub appreciated how useful and clever Zulfi could be, taking him along for advice when he visited Quetta and Lahore in early 1959. General Gul Hassan, whose regiment was Probon's horse, met Commerce Minister Bhutto at a Quetta club soon after the new regime had taken over. He came to the bar, we were having a drink. Hassan recalled, quoting Zulfi's first words to him, "I'm very sorry I'm late, but I just put the old man, Ayub, to bed and I'm free now." The general liked the new minister, who was a convivial drinking companion. He was quite a pleasant chap, good mimic, good sense of humor, and presentable. From Quetta, Ayub and Zulfi flew to Lahore in early February, where both addressed a number of public meetings trying to justify the new regime and its tough policies. Ayub warned his business community audience against selling their conscience for monetary gains and urged them to look forward instead of backward. There is only one miracle that can change the destiny of our nation: hard work, honest work, clean work. Had he learned the word destiny from his bright young companion? Zulfi told students at Islamia College that the unitary form of government was best for Pakistan, a swift shift from the federalism he had been advocating just a few years earlier. Zulfi helped Ayub in many ways. Because the president no longer had time to be commander-in-chief, he had to appoint a successor. Lieutenant General Muhammad Musa was promoted to general for that key post, which Ayub had held since 1951. Now, Ayub worried about his equality of rank with Musa and other generals, however, and the potential dangers that posed. I remember on one occasion we had a meeting of senior army officers, and they submitted to me a paper which explained how everything was going wrong in the country. Ayub wrote, Ayub asked General Musa, "Does this paper represent your view too?" Musa replied, "Yes, all of us feel like that." Ayub exploded angrily. "So far as Pakistan is concerned, it is there and it will stay there, and no one will be able to thwart its progress." But such meetings with his officer peers left Ayub rather nervous. He asked me for my advice on how to place himself head and shoulders above their squabbles. Zulfi recalled later. "I told him that one way of doing it was to show complete impartiality, fairness, and justice, and since it was essential for him to be head and shoulders above the others, it would be better if he elevated his own rank from that of a general to that of a field marshal." Ayub was delighted with that brilliant idea and on the first anniversary of his coup proclaimed himself Field Marshal Ayub. Zulfi was then in New York with the UN delegation. Ayub's military secretary rang him up from Pakistan to thank me for making such a sound suggestion. Similarly, Zulfi helped Ayub prepare the ground for writing a national constitution and holding elections of some sort to muster at least some pretext of popular support for the revolution. Foreign Minister Manzoor Kadir, a Punjabi jurist, suggested establishing a Bureau of National Reconstruction to find out what the people wanted government to do for them, and at the same time to guide people in selecting honest men to run the government. Ayub liked the idea, turned the job over to Zulfi, who was also put in charge of information and broadcasting, village aid, basic democracies, and tourism and minorities. Zulfi's own ambition, of course, was to take over Kadir's ministry, but he had to wait a bit longer for that plum. Ayub launched his basic democracy scheme in 1959. It was basic in so far as the whole structure was to be built from the ground upwards, Ayub wrote, and it was democratic in the sense that the affairs of the country were to be entrusted to the people within a constitutional framework. Zulfi would later denounce it as basic fascism. But in 1959, he still believed in Ayub Khan and was obviously supportive of the system over which he was given direct responsibility. One of his first acts as Minister for Basic Democracies was to tour Sindh to help spread the word about this strange-sounding four-tiered system, elaborately designed to keep Ayub in control as long as possible by reducing Pakistan's entire electorate to a mere 80,000 trustworthy voters. He went first of all to Larkana, then to Nawab Shah, to have dinner as the honoured guest of Ghulam Mustafa Jatoi, one of Sindh's other leading baronial landlords, whose father was a contemporary of Sir Shah Nawaz. The family owned more of Sindh than all of the Bhuttos combined. Everyone assumed that Jatoi and I knew each other. So I was not introduced to him and I did not want to inquire, expecting to get to meet him naturally. Zulfi recalled 20 years later in his death cell. As I moved down the line shaking hands, I saw a young man with a smart movie camera filming me. He continued to do it until I got into the car. He did the same at the lunch. That night, when Zulfi drove to Jatoi house, it was lit like a fire, and so many guests were there that it looked as if the whole of Sindh had been invited. Zulfi felt odd because he had not yet met his host. But when he stepped out of the car, the young man with the movie camera was waiting to receive him. Then I knew. That was the first time Zulfi tasted Jatoi minced and stuffed chicken, which Ghulam Mustafa put on his chief guest's plate by digging his fingers into it and simultaneously telling me that it was their speciality. We both kept the secret and gave everyone the impression that we had known each other for donkey's years. It was the dawn of a powerful political alliance that would keep Zulfi Bhutto and GM Jatoi in joint control over Sindh's public affairs for the next 20 donkey's years. Zulfi left Karachi in September 1959, flying first to Iran, then on to Ankara, Paris, Dundee, London, and Toronto, en route to New York for the fall session of the UN Assembly. The chief foreign correspondent of Dawn, Karachi, at the time, Naseem Ahmed, 1927 to 1990, later Pakistan's ambassador to the UN from 1989 till his death in Tokyo, hosted a lunch for Minister Bhutto at the Dorchester. Zulfi greatly impressed the crowd of overseas Pakistani, mostly students, who heard him talk about energy and power as twin keys to Pakistan's industrial future. He was in top form whenever he addressed a large luncheon or dinner party. Naseem Ahmed recalled that royal salute was the Scotch Zulfi preferred, though he favored Chivas Regal and Johnny Walker. Black Label almost as much. Being in the Dorchester must have brought back memories of his honeymoon there, but Nusrat did not accompany him on this trip. At the United Nations, Zulfi addressed the Second Committee of the General Assembly on the price of the primary commodities, arguing that the major importance of underdeveloped countries like Pakistan to the modern world was that they represented power vacuums, and one false step from any one of them, and the world could be plunged into devastating conflict. One root cause of war was economic disequilibrium, and as long as dangerous vacuums of power existed, with yawning chasms of grinding poverty, ill health, and ignorance, all hope of lasting peace must prove chimerical. Strong pressures kept building within underdeveloped countries, Bhutto noted, and of late, a number of weak and fumbling Afro-Asian regimes, including that in my country, have been swept away. Thanks to his government's new, far-reaching reforms, Pakistan had started to reshape itself. However, investment was inadequate, the rate of domestic savings too low, and the population growth too high. The only way out was through international assistance. Zulfi praised recent UN attempts to increase the flow of investments and to raise the level of technical skills in underdeveloped countries, but argued that a new capital development fund was now needed. Pakistan had just removed a number of taxes and capital participation requirements for foreign companies in order to stimulate investment, yet was desperate for more industrialization. Most important was the need to stabilize primary commodity prices at much higher levels. Pakistan's total loss from falling primary prices on world markets from mid-1957 to mid-1958 alone was more than twice the total financial aid received from different sources up till then. Zulfi noted that the rapid rise in manufactured goods prices had cut the purchasing power of all Pakistani exports to less than half of its 1948 to 49 value. The widening gap between underdeveloped and industrial countries urgently required immediate creation of a compensatory fund. Zulfi completed his work at the UN in a little more than a month, then visited Boston, Washington, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Tokyo, and Manila on his way back home. He addressed Karachi's business community soon after his return to give an accounting of his mission. In Toronto en route to New York, he had met leading exporters, industrialists, and businessmen with a view of giving a boost to our exports to Canada. In New York, discussions with leading businessmen and industrialists had been profitable. In Washington, he had signed a treaty of friendship and commerce with the United States on behalf of Pakistan. On the west coast of the United States, he had looked into trade prospects with the region and became hopeful about improving trade with Japan and the Philippines. Production shortfalls in Pakistan would jeopardize such efforts. Pakistani producers must strive to meet growing foreign demand. The remarkable growth of the economies of Hong Kong, the Philippines, and Japan were in stark contrast to Pakistan's stagnation. But there was no sound reason for this disparity. The new government had introduced an expensive export bonus scheme in January, providing import license vouchers for every export, but no real strides in that sector had yet been made. The talk was a blend of reportage and exhortation.